Okay, imagine this for a second. You're digging through your email, maybe an old account you barely use, and you find this ancient spam message, like 5 years old.
The kind we all get, right? Click here for riches, urgent inheritance, that sort of thing.
Exactly. And this one's asking for your PayPal link to send you $1 million. Total classic scam setup. Your instinct is probably delete, right? Maybe laugh.
Absolutely. Ignore and delete. Standard procedure.
But what if you didn't? What if maybe you're bored, maybe just curious in a weird way, you actually reply, send them your PayPal link.
To a 5-year-old spam email, that seems pointless at best.
Pointless, yeah. Except the very next day you log into PayPal, and there it is, $1 million sitting in your account.
Whoa. Okay, right there the story goes completely off the rails. Because that's not supposed to happen. Ever.
Never. Your first thought is, this has to be fake, right? A glitch, it'll disappear, or fees are coming, something bad is about to happen.
Yeah, it's got to be a setup for the real scam. They'll ask for some back for taxes or transfer fees or something.
That's the playbook. That's what should happen. But in the story we're living into today, that's not what happened.
Okay, so what did happen?
Nothing. For years. 3 years go by, silence. Then 7 more years, still nothing. Decades start piling up.
Wait, decades? With $1 million just sitting there from a spam email.
And it gets even stranger because after a while, the person involved, they started spending it.
Spending the $1 million?
Yeah, all of it. Eventually. And still, for year after year, the consequences you'd expect, PayPal freezing the account, legal issues, something they just didn't materialize.
That just doesn't compute. It feels like something broke. Like a crack in how things are supposed to work.
It really does. It challenges everything we think we know about cause and effect, especially with money and systems over time. And that's why this is so fascinating. We've got access to something incredible.
Really?
A conversation thread spanning over 50 years, documenting this person's actual journey in real time from that first deposit all the way through, through an incredibly long life.
50 years.
Wow.
So this isn't just a story someone told. It's documented interaction, like messages back and forth.
Exactly. Messages from the person experiencing this, asking for advice, and getting responses over this huge span of time. It's like a bizarre, long-form case study.
That's amazing. It gives us this unique window into how something so, frankly, impossible could actually unfold. It makes you ask all sorts of questions.
Totally. Like, how could this even happen? What are the actual chances? Was reality itself sort of glitching out here? And maybe most importantly, how does a person react when their life becomes this weird, illogical roller coaster?
Yeah, how do you navigate that when everything you're told should happen just doesn't?
Yeah.
For decades.
And that's our mission for this deep dive. We're going to unpack this whole unbelievable story. We'll follow the timeline, update by update, using the actual messages. We want to try and understand the mechanics, the probabilities, the sheer strangeness of it all, and how the person at the center dealt with it as things got progressively weirder.
It sounds like a journey that starts somewhere completely unbelievable and probably ends somewhere just as unexpected. Okay, I'm hooked. Let's dive in.
Okay.
Where does it begin after the deposit?
Okay, so it all starts with that initial action, right? The one that defies common sense, responding to that spam email.
That 5-year-old spam email, yeah. Which in internet time is basically archaeology. Links are dead, accounts are closed. 5 years is an eternity for a scam setup.
Exactly. You'd expect zero response. Maybe you get put on a list of active emails for future scams, but getting $1 million sent to your PayPal, that's just, it's not how these things work. It's the definition of low effort, high implausibility. You'd normally just hit delete.
Absolutely. But this person didn't. They sent the link. And boom, next day, $1 million.
Imagine seeing that. The number, the commas. It must have been pure shock because, like we said, everything tells you this shouldn't be possible. Real money doesn't just appear like that from a scam.
No, you expect fake notifications, maybe a bad check that bounces later, or that classic pay us a fee first trick. You don't expect the actual promised amount to just land cleanly.
It completely bypasses all the usual red flags we're taught to look for. The bad grammar, the weird links, the requests for personal info up front. None of that applied here in the same way. The money was just there.
Which immediately changes the game. It's not a potential scam anymore. It's, well, what is it? A mistake. Something illegal. It's suddenly a very real, very confusing, potentially dangerous financial situation.
And you see that in the user's very first message asking for advice. It's not, woohoo, I'm rich. It's basically panic.
Yeah.
Just what to do now. Should I contact someone?
Right. That's not celebration. That's alarm. It's someone realizing they've stepped into something deeply weird and potentially problematic.
Yeah.
They know this isn't normal. They're asking for help because the situation makes no sense.
Exactly. They're out of their depth. And the advice they get initially, it's completely by the book, textbook stuff based on how these things should work.
Which is what exactly?
The expert advice is clear. Look, this is almost certainly fraud. The money isn't legitimately yours in the long run. It will likely be clawed back or cause problems.
Okay, standard warning. And the practical steps.
Step 1, do not spend it. Don't even transfer it. Leave it completely alone.
Crucial. Because if it gets reversed and you've spent it, you're suddenly in debt. Big debt.
Step 2, contact PayPal support immediately. Report the transaction as suspicious. Let them know you didn't solicit this, you think it's fraud.
Get it on record. Alert the system. Makes sense.
Step 3, check everything else. Look for other weird emails, messages, anything connected. And step 4, lock down your accounts. Change passwords. Enable two-factor authentication, where they text you a code. Especially for email and any financial accounts.
Standard digital hygiene after any potential security incident. Prevent further compromise. And report the scam itself, presumably.
Yep, report the scam attempt. Basically, do everything you can to protect yourself legally and financially based on the very high probability that this is illegitimate money that will eventually cause trouble. That's the baseline. That's the rational, expected path forward.
Right. Because in a normal world, PayPal investigates, finds the fraudulent source, reverses the transaction, and that's hopefully the end of it. Maybe your account gets temporarily frozen.
Yeah.
But the problem gets resolved relatively quickly.
This story just refuses to follow the normal path. Because after getting that solid, standard advice, the user vanishes from the thread for 3 years.
3 years.
3 years. Then they pop back up with an update that just blows the initial advice out of the water. They basically say, I am here 3 years after my last message. I still have that money on my account. Nothing happened with that. No one hacked me, contacted me, or anything.
Wow. Okay. 3 full years. $1 million from a supposed scam email.
Okay.
And nothing? No reversal, no account freeze, no contact from PayPal, police, scammers, anyone.
According to the user, absolutely nothing. Zilch. Nada.
That
Yeah.
is the first major deviation from reality, isn't it? The expected consequences, the system corrections that should have happened, just didn't. For 3 years, that's a huge anomaly.
It really is. And you can almost hear the surprise, the bafflement in the expert's next response. They literally say, wow, that's really surprising. And it's unusual for something like that to happen without any follow-up.
Yeah, because it is unusual. It goes against everything we know about how financial systems track and correct these things. The expert's understanding is being directly challenged by this person's actual experience.
But even though they're surprised, the advice is still cautious. It kind of evolves slightly.
Also,
They reiterate the core advice, but maybe with a bit more emphasis. Contact PayPal directly again, maybe implying, don't just report it. Really push for an answer. Keep monitoring the account closely. And crucially,
don't spend it yet.
still don't spend it. Even after 3 years, the expert says you still need to be cautious because, theoretically, the funds could still be reversed or frozen down the line.
So, the expert, despite the evidence of 3 years of nothing, still clings to the underlying principle that this must be wrong somehow and the consequences are just delayed,
Yeah.
extremely delayed.
Exactly. Their logic, based on how systems should work, hasn't entirely let go. There's this tension. The user is living a reality that the expert says is impossible, yet the expert can't fully dismiss the possibility of a future correction because the initial event was so inherently suspicious. How do you live with that? Knowing the money's there unchallenged, but being told constantly it should be a problem.
It's a strange kind of limbo. And it sounds like the user tried to break that limbo. You said they took more action.
Yeah, after that 3-year update and the renewed advice, the user reports back later that they did take those steps. They contacted PayPal directly again. And they even went a step further.
What did they do?
They contacted their local police department, told them about the situation.
Okay, wow. That's responsible. That's actively engaging the official channels, trying to get clarity, trying to do the right thing, even though the situation is bizarre.
Totally. They're not trying to hide it. They're presenting this weird situation to the authorities. And this is where the story takes another absolutely stunning turn.
What happened when they contacted PayPal and the police?
The user reports back that neither PayPal nor the police found anything strange or wrong with the account or the funds.
Wait, what? They investigated, looked into this $1 million deposit from a 5-year-old spam email, and concluded
Yeah.
it was fine. Legit.
Apparently.
Yeah.
According to the user's update, the official systems looked at it and basically gave it a clean bill of health.
That is mind-boggling. That's not just the system failing to notice. That's the system actively looking at the anomaly and saying, looks okay to us. How is that even possible? It validates the user's weird reality in a huge way.
It totally deepens the mystery. How does something like that get past official checks? And the experts' reaction to this news, you can sense the growing disbelief.
What do they say this time?
Stuff like, that's definitely an interesting twist, and really emphasizing how unusual this is. It sounds like you may have gotten really luckin', calling it pretty rare for a scam like that to resolve with no negative consequences. Basically acknowledging they seem to have dodged a massive bullet against all odds.
I'm guessing the caution didn't just evaporate.
Not entirely. Even after official checks came back clear, the advice is still, continue to monitor your account, don't spend the money yet, stay cautious with emails.
Still, even after PayPal and the police apparently said it's okay. Why?
I think the experts' rationale, grounded in the sheer improbability of the origin, is that even if current checks miss something, the theoretical risk hasn't completely vanished. Maybe something could surface later. It's like the empirical evidence says, fine, but the fundamental nature of the event screams risk. They can't quite reconcile the two.
That resistance to accepting the reality because it contradicts the rules?
Yeah.
It's fascinating. The user must be feeling incredibly conflicted. They have official validation, yet the expert voice is still urging extreme caution.
And the strange state of affairs, this unresolved tension, just keeps going for years. Which brings us to the next major turning point.
Okay, what happens next?
7 more years pass. We're now a full decade, 10 years since that $1 million first appeared.
10 years.
And the user sends another update. But this time it's different. It's not just about the money sitting there anymore. They report, I am 10 years after first message. I have spent $600K of that money. Nothing wrong happened. Should I still be cautious?
Wow. Okay. That's huge. 10 years in, and they've spent $600,000 of it.
$600,000. This is where it moves from just possessing this weird money to actively using it, integrating it into their life. That seriously raises the stakes.
Absolutely. That's a conscious decision to start treating the anomaly as real.
Or maybe
just deciding the risk after a decade of silence was worth taking. It's a massive step.
you have to wonder what went into that decision. Was it gradual? Did they test the waters? Or did they just reach a point where waiting indefinitely seemed pointless? Spending that much money means they crossed a significant line.
And how did the expert react to that? To the active spending of such a large chunk of the mysterious money?
The tone definitely shifts again. You hear the surprise, maybe even a bit of alarm. Wow, that's honestly pretty wild. And acknowledging how unprecedented this lack of consequence is. Definitely rare for something like this to go unnoticed, especially after such a large amount of money has been spent.
So the expert recognizes this is way outside the norm. Do the warnings change now that the money's being actively used?
They intensify and they get more specific about what could still go wrong. It's not just about the money being reversed anymore.
Okay, like what?
The expert points out that even if the initial deposit slipped through, PayPal systems might still flag the account based on the spending patterns. Large sums moving out over time can trigger alarms. And, more importantly, they introduce a much more serious warning.
Which is?
Legal risks, explicitly. They state clearly. Receiving money from a fraudulent or suspicious source can still have legal implications, even if you didn't orchestrate it. Ah, okay. So now it's not just about potentially owing money back to PayPal. It's about potential legal trouble, money laundering implications, receiving proceeds of crime, that kind of thing, even if you were initially unwitting.
Precisely. And the advice becomes much more urgent about self-protection from that angle. Things like, seriously consider cutting ties with that PayPal account altogether now, and with real emphasis this time. Get proper legal advice immediately. Understand your potential exposure. Figure out how to protect yourself legally.
So the threat level has escalated in the expert's view, from a financial anomaly to a potentially serious legal problem for the user, simply by virtue of having received and now spent this money, regardless of its origin or their intent.
Exactly. It's a stark shift. And you have to wonder, how does the user process this? They're spending money that seems to defy all rules. So they keep asking if they should be cautious. And now they're being told about potentially serious legal ramifications. The internal conflict must be immense. They're living this strange contradiction day in, day out. Living with $1 million ghost that paid out, but might still come back to haunt you legally. It's an incredible psychological burden, even alongside the financial benefit. And the clock keeps ticking.
It does. Another 8 years go by after that update about spending the $600 K. We're now at a total of 18 years since the initial deposit.
18 years. Wow.
And another update comes from the user, short and to the point again. Hey, another 8 years gone and I spent all that money. Nothing wrong happened. Should I still be cautious?
All of it. The full million is gone now. Spent
Yeah.
over 18 years.
That's what they report. 18 years, $1 million received from a bizarre source, now completely spent. And still, apparently, no negative consequences have materialized.
That is just astonishing. In the world of digital finance and fraud detection, 18 years is practically geologic time for nothing to have happened after all that spending.
The experts' reaction really underscores this. There's a slight mix-up in their response where they mention 13 years instead of 18, but the sentiment is crystal clear. They call it an absolutely unbelievable story and say it's remarkable that you've managed to avoid any problems up to this point.
So even the expert is just floored by the sheer duration and lack of consequence at this point. But
yeah.
let me guess. They still advise caution.
You guessed it. Even after 18 years and all the money being spent, the advice still includes things like long-term monitoring and potential lingering legal risks.
Still, after almost 2 decades.
Yep. And consulting a professional, a lawyer or financial advisor is stressed again. But now the rationale is framed slightly differently. Do it for peace of mind and to solidify your legal standing. Like maybe the active risk is lower, but you should still cover your bases for your own mental well-being and legal certainty.
It really highlights how deeply this story challenges our expectations about consequence. The rational mind, the expert view, just cannot fully let go of the idea that this should have gone wrong, even when faced with nearly 2 decades of evidence to the contrary.
And think about the user, still asking, should I still be cautious? Even after successfully spending $1 million over 18 years without incident. It shows that despite the apparent luck, that underlying knowledge that the origin was weird, that feeling that this wasn't quite right, it never fully went away.
That internal conflict persists. The benefit was real, tangible, life-changing, presumably. But the shadow of the improbable origin, the what if, lingered for almost 2 decades. It shows that sometimes, even when consequences seem to be indefinitely deferred, the uncertainty itself can be a kind of consequence.
Absolutely. And just when you think the story can't possibly get any stranger or the timeline's more extreme, it does. We now enter a phase that's almost beyond belief.
Okay, I'm braced. What happens after the 18-year mark?
20 more years pass.
20 more years. On top of the 18, so we're at 38 years total.
38 years since the $1 million landed in that PayPal account. And the user sends another update. This time, the focus isn't just the money, it's their age. They write, hey, 20 years later from my last message, I am 91 years old and nothing happened so far.
91 years old. And still, nothing. After nearly 4 decades, that is staggering. That's longer than many careers, many marriages. It's a huge chunk of human lifespan lived under this bizarre financial shadow, or perhaps sunshine, depending on how you see it.
And this update, this milestone of age and time, seems to be the final straw for the experts' long-held caution. Their stance finally, fundamentally shifts.
After 38 years, they finally changed their tune. What do they say?
Well, they still acknowledge how incredible it is, absolutely incredible, remarkable, but then, for the very first time, they explicitly concede that the risk is basically gone.
They actually say it's safe now.
Pretty much. They state, quite definitively, given the amount of time that's passed and the fact that you've been able to spend the money without issue, it's safe to say the risk is extremely low. And even more clearly, it's highly unlikely anything ever will happen at this point.
Wow. That's a major shift after decades of warnings.
Huge. The expert essentially tells the user, now 91, that they've earned the right to kick back and relax, and they call the whole saga probably a closed chapter.
So after almost 40 years, the expert view finally aligns with the user's lived reality. The anomaly, it seems, has been unofficially accepted by the passage of time itself. The system, the universe, whatever, just gave up on correcting it.
It feels like that, doesn't it? Like time itself acted as the final arbiter and declared the user clear. At 91 years old, they get this validation. It profoundly challenges our ideas about inevitable consequences. Here, they just weren't.
It seems like the perfect, albeit incredibly strange, ending to the story. A weird event happened, defied all expectations for decades, and finally faded into the past, absolved by time. Case closed.
You would absolutely think so. It feels like resolution, a bizarre lucky break that lasted a lifetime. But no, this story isn't done. It has one last act, and it's utterly shocking. Cruel, almost.
No. What happens after being told it's a closed chapter at 91?
17 more years go by. 17.
So the user is now 108 years old.
108 years old. And they send another message, and it just shatters everything. It rips that closed chapter wide open again. The message is basically, hey, I am 108 years old, and some young lady wants her money back. What should I do? I have nothing at all. I sold all my stuff, and country's covering all my expenses.
Oh my God. At 108, after being told the risk was gone, someone shows up demanding the money back.
A specific person, a young lady. It's not the system, not PayPal, not the police. It's a direct human claim on that money from over half a century ago.
And the timing. It's just devastating. After all those decades thinking you're clear, then this happens. And adding to the vulnerability, the user says they have nothing left. They're reliant on state support.
Exactly. Presumably the million was spent long ago, maybe other assets too, over such a long life. So they're facing this claim from a position of extreme age and complete financial dependency.
This is where the origin story becomes critical, isn't it? Why now? Why this specific person? Did the user explain that?
They did. In the same update, they provide the missing piece, the explanation that suddenly makes the timing and the claimant make a twisted kind of sense. They reveal, quote, it's related to the scam. It was hers family money, and her distant relative made a joke and put scam on my email years back.
A joke. The whole thing started as a joke by a relative who somehow actually transferred $1 million of family money.
Apparently, that's the user's explanation. This wasn't random internet noise. It was some bizarre internal family situation, a prank or joke gone spectacularly wrong that resulted in a huge sum being sent to a stranger who happened to reply to the scam email.
That explains. Well, it explains the origin of the actual money, maybe why it wasn't flagged initially if it came from a seemingly legitimate internal source within a family network. And it definitely explains why, decades later, a specific heir might come looking for it once the truth surfaced.
Exactly. It reframes the entire narrative. The user doesn't say how they learned this detail now, but it provides the crucial context for this late-stage human confrontation.
And the expert advice must have shifted dramatically again, right? It's not about system risk anymore.
Totally. The expert response acknowledges the new context. Now that makes more sense. The focus pivots entirely to dealing with this direct human and legal claim.
What kind of advice do they give for handling a situation like that at 108?
Honesty is recommended. Empathy for the claimant, acknowledging it was her family's money. But above all, get legal help immediately. This is now a complex legal situation involving inheritance, potentially the statute of limitations, the user's age, and lack of assets. It's a minefield.
Mediation is probably suggested too. Try to find a resolution outside of court.
Yep. Mediation is suggested. And the theoretical idea of compensation is floated, but with the immediate caveat that it's likely impossible given the user is 108 and relies on the state. The situation has morphed from this abstract, long-running anomaly into a deeply personal, legally tangled crisis, hitting at the most vulnerable point imaginable.
How do you even begin to process that? Being told you're safe, then facing this decades later knowing the origin was this weird family joke. It feels almost like a cosmic prank itself. The unfairness, just due to the sheer time elapsed, is overwhelming.
It's profoundly tragic, and incredibly, the escalation doesn't even stop there. The situation manages to get even worse, even more surreal.
How can it possibly get worse than facing a claim for $1 million at 108 with no assets?
4 years pass, the user is now 112 years old.
112.
And the update they send is stark. The consequences have gone beyond personal claims and now directly involve the state in a punitive way. The message reads, I am 112 years old, and country was forced to sold their asset to cover my expenses from the spam. They wanted to put me in the jail, but I must wear 3 years for free spot.
I'm sorry, what? The country had to sell assets because of expenses linked back to the spam money from over 50 years ago. No. And they want to put a 112-year-old in jail. But there's a waiting list.
That's what the user reports. The state somehow linked the user's current need for support back to the original funds, felt compelled to cover those costs by selling assets, which sounds bizarre in itself, and the ultimate consequence determined by the system is incarceration for a 112-year-old.
With a 3-year wait time for a prison bed.
This defies any sense of proportion or logic or basic humanity. It challenges everything. How long legal matters take? 55 plus years. The impact...
State financing, proposed punishment, jail at 112. It's like the system, dormant for decades, finally woke up and just applied some rule completely divorced from reality or context.
It's the ultimate bureaucratic nightmare, played out to an absurd, tragic extreme. And the expert's response, it reflects this gravity, this Surreality.
What can they even advise at this point?
They call it a dramatic turn. Things have really escalated. Situation is quite serious. The advice becomes laser focused on sheer survival within this baffling legal predicament for someone frail and extremely elderly.
Legal counsel must be number one, right? Absolutely critical.
Absolutely critical, not just to navigate, but to fight it, to argue mitigation based on extreme age, poor health, lack of original malicious intent, hammering home that the user was arguably a victim of the initial bizarre joke scam.
And health has to be paramount.
Yeah.
You can't realistically imprison someone like that.
Exactly. The expert stresses making sure authorities know the full medical situation, arguing for alternatives, house arrest, a medical facility, anything other than traditional prison, which would be inhumane and likely fatal. Re-emphasizing the victim of the original scam angle is key.
Are things like restitution even mentioned? Or is it past that point?
They're mentioned as possibilities to explore maybe some symbolic payment. But the fact the state is talking about selling assets suggests it's probably moved way beyond a simple financial settlement. It's become this incredibly severe systemic consequence grinding forward regardless of the human costs.
It's just the system delivering a nonsensical outcome decades too late. How does the user even cope with being told, at 112, you're going to jail, but please wait 3 years? They're still asking for help, still trying to navigate this impossible reality.
It's heartbreaking, and then the impossible becomes reality.
3 years pass.
3 years pass. The user is now 115 years old, and they send their final message in the thread. It's almost hard to read.
What does it say?
Hey, I'm not 115 years old. I need a medical tool to even breath, and I can't even move. I'm sleeping like 20 hours of the day in my medical bed. But hey, my first day in jail where I will be for next 12 years.
Oh, God. First day in jail. A 115. Needing equipment to breathe. Immobile, sleeping constantly, sentenced to 12 years.
It's the ultimate delayed, cruel consequence. Serving a prison sentence under those conditions, it's almost unimaginable. It pushes the boundaries of what seems possible, let alone just or reasonable.
What can the expert even say to that? The advice must be purely about damage control, survival.
Pretty much. The expert's tone is heavy, incredibly tough, especially harsh. The advice is all about managing this impossible situation from within the system.
Making sure medical needs are met in prison, that has to be top priority.
Absolutely. And pursuing every single legal appeal possible for sentence reduction or transfer to a medical facility or house arrest based purely on the extreme health issues and age. Contacting family, advocates, keeping the lawyer engaged for any glimmer of hope.
The focus shifts entirely to just minimizing the suffering, mitigating the extreme physical cost of this consequence that arrived so incredibly late and so severely.
Exactly. It's beyond making sense anymore. It's just dealing with the harsh reality of this final, crushing act from a system that took over 60 years to deliver its verdict. How does anyone react to that? There aren't really words for it.
It's just a tragedy compounded by absurdity over an impossible timescale.
And then the story finally concludes, but not with a message from the user.
How does it end?
12 years later. 12 years after that last message about entering jail at 115, a new message appears. It's from the user's son.
The son, okay. What does he say?
He writes, hey, 12 years later, I am my father's son. My father was typing with you, so I want to provide additional info. My father passed away from playing football in jail in his age of 126 years, just 1 year before his release. No one even cares about the scam anymore. That's all. Bye.
Passed away at 126 years old. An unbelievably long life.
Incredible longevity. But the cause of death, it's the final surreal twist in this whole saga.
Playing football in jail at 126.
Playing football in jail at 126, that's what the Sun reports. It's tragic, bizarre, almost darkly comical. It perfectly encapsulates how far this story deviated from any recognizable reality.
And he died just 1 year before finishing the 12-year sentence he started at 115.
Yeah.
That's just wow. Adds another layer of the unbelievable.
And the Sun's final comment is so telling, isn't it? No one even cares about the scam anymore. After everything, after 60-plus years defined by this initial event, it faded into irrelevance compared to the sheer length of the life, the delayed drama, and the bizarre ending.
The original $1 million event became a footnote to the incredible, protracted human story that followed. The expert's final reply in the thread is just condolences to the son, acknowledging the father's long life and endurance, and that's the end of the thread.
What a story. Okay, let's try to process this. We walked through the whole timeline, this unbelievable journey. Let's circle back to those core questions we started with. First, how on earth did this sequence of events even happen?
Yeah, the how. It wasn't just one thing, was it? It was like a perfect storm of improbable events all linked together over this massive stretch of time.
Right. It starts with that incredibly weird origin, the relatives joke scam that actually sent real money. That's improbable event number one. And the recipient just happened to be someone who replied to a 5-year-old email.
Then, crucially, the systems failed. PayPal's initial checks, the police investigation. They looked right at it and somehow saw nothing wrong. That failure was key. It let the money just sit there, unchallenged, for years.
Then the user makes the choice to spend it, all of it, actively participating in the anomaly. And still, for nearly 2 decades, the spending itself didn't trigger any alarms. Another system failure, or perhaps just slipping through the cracks over time.
And the sheer longevity is a massive factor. The user living to 126. That provided the enormous time frame needed for the really delayed consequences to eventually surface. Most stories like this would end long before that, either through resolution or the person involved passing away.
And the consequence wasn't the system randomly catching up, was it? It was the human element. The claimant, the young lady appearing decades later, likely after the truth of the joke finally emerged in her family.
Exactly. And that specific human claim, combined with the user's age and lack of resources, seems to be what finally forced the state system's hand, leading to the whole asset selling, legal action, jail sentence fiasco so incredibly late in the game.
So the how is this cascade. Bizarre origin, willing recipient, initial system failure, user spending, extreme age, delayed human claim, and finally, a very slow, very heavy-handed state intervention. Each step unlikely, but together they created this unique reality.
Okay, so what about the chances, the probability of that entire Rube Goldberg machine of events actually playing out?
I think the experts' reactions throughout the thread tell that story best, don't you? The constant surprise, the repeated use of words like unusual, rare, wild, unbelievable, incredible.
Yeah, every step of the way, the expert viewers basically, this shouldn't be happening. They were consistently reacting to something that was statistically almost impossible, vanishingly small probability.
So the story itself is the evidence. It demonstrates that sometimes, against all odds, if you combine enough weird, low-probability events and stretch them over a 70-year timeline, the near impossible can happen. It wasn't likely. It was just what occurred. An extreme outlier.
It makes you really question how we model probability when time and human factors get stretched to such extremes. Our models aren't really built for situations like this.
Which leads right into that other question. Was something wrong with reality itself here? Did the universe glitch?
Well, probably not a literal code error in the matrix, but it does make you seriously question our assumptions about how things are supposed to work, especially consequence and time.
We expect consequences to follow actions reasonably quickly, right? We expect systems to correct errors eventually. We assume that after decades, the past loses its power to create new problems.
And this story just completely upends all of that. The consequence wasn't just delayed. It arrived decades late in a severe, almost nonsensical form long after anyone would have thought possible. It feels fundamentally wrong according to our usual understanding.
So maybe it's less a flaw in reality's physics and more about the profound weirdness and fallibility of human systems, financial, legal, when pushed to their absolute limits by time and circumstance. These systems produced an outcome that feels absurd because the inputs in the timeline were so far outside the norm.
Yeah, the reality the user experienced was definitely non-standard. First, this prolonged period where rules didn't apply. Then this incredibly delayed, surreal, and harsh application of rules. It absolutely challenges our intuitive feel for cause and effect over lifetimes. It shows how messy and unpredictable our own systems can be at the extremes.
Okay, and the last question. How did the person react to living through all this absurdity?
The fascinating arc, isn't it? Starts with confusion, maybe fear, definitely seeking guidance. The rational response to an irrational event. Following the rules.
Then, as the rules consistently failed to apply, there seems to have been this slow shift. A normalization. Maybe testing the waters, then deciding to spend the money, adapting to the anomaly, living with it, perhaps enjoying it, but always with that little voice asking, should I still be cautious? That lingering unease.
Yeah, they adapted to living outside the expected rules, but never fully shook the feeling that the rules might snap back, which eventually they did.
And when those consequences finally hit the claimant, the state, the jail sentence, the reaction wasn't resignation, was it? It was a return to seeking help, trying to navigate, trying to mitigate. even in the face of the utterly impossible situation at 112, 115 years old.
Mm.
There is this enduring effort to grapple with the reality imposed on them.
It shows this incredible, if tragic, resilience,
Mm.
actively engaging with a reality that made no sense from the initial shock right through to the final bizarre years. Their reactions evolved as the nature of the nonsense changed, from lucky break to crushing burden.
So when you put it all together, this story that started with a forgotten spam email and an impossible $1 million, it becomes so much more than just a weird anecdote.
Yeah, it's this deep, strange exploration of chance, the limits of systems, the weirdness of time and consequence, and just the sheer resilience and vulnerability of a human life stretched way beyond the ordinary. Where the chickens didn't just come home to roost, they waited 60 years, arrived on a different continent, and demanded the state sell assets.
A life utterly defined by that one click on a dusty digital message.
It really was a truly deep dive into the far edges of probability and human experience.
And thinking about this whole saga, it really does make you pause and wonder about delayed consequences more broadly, not just in freak situations like this.
What do you mean?
Like, think about decisions made, actions taken maybe years ago in our own lives, maybe in society, technology, the environment, things set in motion that seem quiet now.
Like metaphorical old spam emails just sitting there in the background. There are potential consequences dormant, but not necessarily gone.
Exactly. What might still be ticking away, set in motion long ago, waiting to arrive decades later in a form we can't possibly predict right now. It makes you wonder what future consequences from past actions are still out there, waiting to reshape a reality we think we understand. What unexpected bills are still waiting to come due, maybe long after we've forgotten sending the original email.